In 2020, Democrats took full control of Washington.
And it will give Democrats control of the Senate.
Joe Biden has been elected.
But Republicans stood up in the states.
There was no blue wave. Democratic down-ballot disasters carried all the way to the state legislatures.
Now, we're the last line of defense against the Democrats' socialist agenda. The ways we're fighting back are bigger than you think. Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to It's Bigger Than You Think, a conversation about the politics that most impact our everyday lives. This is episode 29. I'm your host, Annie Moore, and joining me today is Iowa's Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Naig.
Well, great to join you today.
All right, so to kind of start things off, you grew up on your family's farm, right? So Can you just talk kind of like what was that like?
Oh, you bet. And grew up on a farm in Northwest Iowa. Actually, I still farm today with my family, with my dad and my uncle. And honestly, now, see, I love people that grow things and build things. And you know, I when you think about that in the agriculture sense, you've got to grow something, build something every single growing season. And I just have so much respect for people who do that. And so the way I grew up, couldn't have asked for a better way, a better lifestyle. And so happy that I'm still involved in that operation today. And of course, one of the things I love most is being able to take my boys. I've got 3 boys. Get them to the farm and get them doing some real work, some hard work. Get them dirty and get them a chance to learn some of those great life lessons that I had a chance to learn.
How do you think that growing up on a farm shaped you into who you are now?
You know, it's so true that you have to learn. You know, I always say that you learn some how to be resilient through some very challenging times. You learn that you've just flat out got to work hard sometimes, especially in physical labor, mental labor, all of those things. And of course, then you've got to accept that there are just some things that you can't control. And that's where things like your faith in God come in handy, because you have to figure out how to manage through all of those things, control what you can, manage the risk of the things that you can't. But I think those are some of those lessons that I've learned that are the things, again, I'm trying to instill in our kids. But also what I try to bring to my work at the Iowa Department of Ag is, are we reflective of that? You know, we want to be reflective of the industry and the community that we serve. And so having grown up that way and learned some of those key lessons, I think that helps us. And I've got a lot of folks who grew up the same way working with me at the Department of Ag. And we try to do that. We try to bring that every day to our work. I
love that. What kind of farming does your family do? And what should people know about that type of farming?
You bet. Good question. Well, in Iowa, we're number 1 in corn production, and we're number 2 in soybean production in the United States, and we're actually number 1 in pork production as well. And so those are the things that historically we raised hogs and then grew corn and soybean. Today we're just growing the crops. Now we don't have livestock on the farm any longer. I've got an uncle who runs a few cows, 20 cows or so. But we are just row crop today. Then again, what I would say about that is it's something that we do very well in the state of Iowa, and we're blessed. I farm in the northwest corner of our state, and it's a beautiful place, great natural resources. We've got wonderful soil, and weather cooperates most of the time. But I think what people need to know about that is, you only get one shot per year at growing that crop. And again, I talked about it before, but there's a lot of variables that come in. We can't predict the marketplace. We can't always, manage or control the costs that we have to pay for fuel and fertilizer. And we certainly can't control the weather. So there's risk that farmers have to take, and they do that every year.
I didn't realize Iowa was number 1 in corn. I'm from Indiana.
Oh, yes.
I always say homegrown, corn fed when people are like, where are you from?
Well, I always say Indiana is a great agriculture state. It maybe isn't the greatest agriculture state, but, it's pretty darn good.
I guess if you can claim number 1 in so many things, I can't really argue with the facts, but that is what it is. So the races to become an elected agriculture official are probably some of the most overlooked in the country, I would say. Can you talk about what your job actually entails and why these seats are so important?
You bet. And I appreciate that question, a chance to share what ag commissioners or secretaries or directors, and we have all those different titles. I'm a secretary, but I've got colleagues across the country who are both elected and then many who are appointed by governors. But you look across the country, And ag departments are a little bit different from state to state. But when I look at Iowa, and for the most part, this holds true with ag departments across the country, is really we've got a responsibility around consumer protection, food safety. And then in the case of Iowa, this is a huge part of what we do, and that's around soil conservation and water quality, again, protecting those natural resources. So, consumer protection, you're talking about things like, making sure that the scales and fuel pumps and things like that are reading correctly. So weights and measures. Food safety, we inspect and approve and dairies and meat processors in the state of Iowa. That's just one little piece of what we do. And then on the conservation side, for us, about 60% of the work that my team does and about 60% of our budget is focused on that land stewardship part of what we do. Again, preserving those natural resources that we've got to have soil and water in the state of Iowa, or we can't be successful in our agriculture. So that's kind of in a nutshell. But then an ag secretary also is somebody who has a chance to fight for expanding markets for their farmers and their ag businesses. And then I have a really important role to advocate for our agriculture and for our state when it comes to federal policies or maybe even international trade agreements and things like that.
Oh, that's super interesting. What would you say is your favorite part out of all of those different parts? Which one's your favorite that you get to do? Maybe not even like in your day to day, but that you're like, this is my favorite thing. I love it.
Now that's like asking you to pick your favorite child, and that sort of thing. But let me say this: there's things that I love about kind of each of those pieces, and then there's some challenges that come with each of those pieces. But one of the things that really inspired me to run and to serve in this role is our work around conservation. I'm a big believer in that. Again, in Iowa, we have been blessed with natural resources. We have great productive soil. It's what makes us who we are. And so if we aren't protecting that soil then and water, then we can't be productive as an agriculture. And so that's one of the things that I most appreciate. But I have to tell you that the single greatest part of my job is a chance to go out and to meet Iowans of all kinds, farmers, non-farmers, people involved in businesses. Again, I mentioned it before. I love people who build things and take risk, and to go see those folks and to learn from them, and then to hear, what do they expect of government? What are the things that get in their way? What are the things that we can do to be helpful to them? Or again, get out of the way and let them be successful. And I tell you, that is the best part of what I do. I get to bring those things back and then try to have an impact on that.
What are some of the projects that you've worked on in your time as Secretary of Ag that you're the most proud of, that you want to point to them and be like, this was my favorite child in this moment?
There's really two areas, maybe three areas that look, again, I've tried to really center our work around expanding markets for our farmers. And so one of those key markets for Iowa is around renewable fuels, ethanol and biodiesel. And we've done a lot of work together with the whole ag community, with our governor, with our legislature, to expand the access to higher blends of ethanol. And, that's something that helps us because it's an economic driver for the state of Iowa. But tell you what, in this day and age of what we're seeing for high fuel prices, the way that we're becoming more dependent on foreign sources of oil, that is problematic for our country in the long run. And so we ought to think about domestic renewable energy production that benefits Americans, that benefits Iowans. And so something I'm very proud of is that work around domestic renewable energy production in Iowa. And, I guess the second thing would be around our work on water quality. There are a lot of folks out there who just want us to regulate that, say, make farmers do things a certain way. Well, we don't believe that. We don't think that that's, first of all, the right role for government. And secondly, we don't think it's even the right way to achieve our goals around improving water quality. So we work with farmers. We provide reasonable support and assistance, but we let market forces also impact that, and farmers will do the right thing. But bringing that balance, I think, is an important thing of what we've been able to do in this role, is recognizing the right role for government. Let's build a culture of conservation, not a culture of regulation. That is not the answer in this case. And so that's something I'm really proud of, that we've been able to hold the line there and even build out that culture of conservation that's so important.
So going back to your first point there, how have the Democrats gotten in the way of some of this energy, domestic renewable energy that you've been pushing for?
The last couple of decades, we've worked hard with, and hey, that we are also should have an all of the above energy strategy in this country, but we should favor things that are domestic in nature. And so that means oil exploration as well. That means coal. That means anything that we can do to, again, to continue to secure energy independence, because when that's homegrown, then we benefit and we are able to control that. When we are dependent on other countries, then we're out begging other folks to, to help us out or to give us favorable terms. I mean, that's problematic in the long run. And we all know that the cost of energy drives the cost of literally everything else. And so that has been a disastrous policy. And again, now there's an obsession in the Biden administration on electric vehicles. And hey, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but let's make sure that we don't trade energy independence in this country for dependence on foreign sources of batteries for electric vehicles, because those things are coming from overseas. And so that to me is incredibly problematic. We've worked over the last couple of decades to get to this point of energy independence. In the last just over a year and a half, it has been reversed.
How have Biden and the Democrats' reckless spending impacted farmers?
First of all, the reckless spending that's driving inflationary activity in this country that's at a 40-year high has impacted every single American. And it's a tragedy when you start to think about how that paycheck just isn't going as far as it used to. And that impacts everybody. And especially as they're looking at those essential things that they need, food, housing, education, all those types of transportation to and from work. That absolutely slams our middle class and working families. And that's tragic. Now, agriculture is not immune from that at all. And so, when you look at a farmer or an agribusiness, of course, you're reliant on inputs, whether it's, again, fuel, fertilizer, seed, equipment, all of those types of things. The cost of all of those things are up. And then, of course, you've got a disrupted supply chain that you're selling into as well. So it has created a tremendous amount of pressure. And of course, unfortunately, now you have to layer on the top of increased regulation coming out of Washington, which just drives up the cost of compliance, the cost of doing business. And that really is putting a crunch on farmers, small businesses, you name it, being impacted.
So you mentioned inflation's at a 40-year high. How has that affected food prices across the country?
Yeah, again, you're seeing that impact. It's hitting the pocketbook. You see it at the gas pump. You see it on the grocery store shelf. And I think this is something that we want folks to understand is that, the major cost driver in food is not what's coming off of the farm necessarily, but it is everything that happens after that, which is the number one driver of that cost is energy. Think of it. You've got to process, manufacture, make that food, transport it for where you need it, get it on the grocery store shelf and that sort of thing. And so to me, the cost of energy coupled with inflation and a supply chain disruption has driven up those costs. And unfortunately, what we've seen is the Biden administration and the Democrats in Washington continue to, they're still headed in the wrong direction. I'd say double, triple down on this reckless spending strategy that they've been employing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the supply chain crisis, if you will, has been going on for quite some time. People aren't talking about it as much anymore, but how do farmers feel about that? Are they still being impacted? You've mentioned it a couple times too.
Absolutely. Again, I think in the food and ag, think of all of the things that we need from a food and agriculture standpoint, everything that appears in the grocery store, the things that are at the restaurant that you like to go to eat at. Think of where that has to come from. It comes from a farm somewhere and works its way through a supply chain. And so to the extent that we have high fuel costs, that we have a shortage of truck drivers or just workforce shortages all throughout the supply chain, what that ultimately results in higher costs and a disrupted supply chain. Hey, something happened in this country in the last couple of years that I think a lot of folks didn't think could happen. And that's that we had shortages at the grocery store, or maybe there were items that you couldn't get, or you couldn't get as many as you wanted. And so, those are things that really do impact America's families.
What are you guys doing in Iowa to kind of fight back against all of these problems that Washington is just serving up on a platter for you and saying, good luck eating this?
The first things first is keep your house in order. And that's something that I'm really proud of, the way Iowa, our Governor Reynolds, and our legislature, Republican controlled Senate and House have really kept Iowa's house in order. We're a low tax state. In fact, we've been cutting taxes and balancing budgets all while in DC, you're seeing quite the opposite. In fact, I think that's actually the strategy for states. If you want to be successful, do literally the opposite of what's happening in Washington, and you'll have some success. But a low regulatory environment, a favorable business climate that allows for families and communities to thrive and grow. Those are the types of things that you have to, at the base level, those things have to be headed in the right direction, or you've got problems. Just look at the way that people are moving to red states across the country. Lower cost of living, lower cost of housing, job opportunities. That's how you counter what's happening in DC. And of course, then we really do need to be focused on November and thinking about how do we bring new leadership and different ideas to really getting this economy going again.
What are some policies that Iowa has implemented that you think other states should replicate?
Well, I think it goes back to that. Do you have a climate, a business climate, and you're focused on making it easier and better for families to live, work, and play? Those things impact our communities all across our states. And I think making sure that you're holding the line on spending, reasonably spending, but also remembering that taxpayer money comes from the taxpayer, and returning that and helping put more resources in the hands of consumers and of taxpayers, especially in an environment where you're seeing this inflationary activity. So I think Iowa's approach to that has been very favorable. On the ag side of things, I do think that we are recognized as a leader in our efforts to, again, balance that production that we need to see in agriculture with protecting our natural resources, but remembering that at the center of that is a farmer who needs to be profitable. And how do you balance all of those things? And so we've really tried to show and certainly do the right things here in Iowa, but I think that others have watched what we've been doing and are modeling as well. I also learned from other states as well, but that's something that we think we're doing pretty well at, is balancing production with the need to be more sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally makes sense. Okay, so when this airs, we're going to be about 60 days out from Election Day, which is crazy. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I feel very good about Republicans' chances to really have some significant gains this year across the country, though we're going to have to work for it, and up and down the ticket. And I routinely say when I'm on the campaign trail that it matters who you send to the courthouse, it matters who you send to the state capitol, and it matters who you send to Washington, D.C. in your daily lives. And so right up and down the ticket, we've got to make sure that we have a strong bench of Republican conservative candidates, but that a red wave is something that we're going to have to go out and work hard to achieve. Republicans have shown some success and ability to do that. It's why I appreciate the work also of RSLC in supporting and investing in and focusing on some of these down ballot races that are so important, because again, we've got to make sure that a team arrives after November to be able to carry this mission forward. So I'm very optimistic. We've got a lot of work to do in the next 60 days to make sure that it comes to fruition.
Okay, if you could tell our audience one thing, if you're like, this is the one thing I need you to remember out of everything that I've said today, or one thing that you haven't said today, what would it be?
That I am incredibly proud to serve as the Secretary of Agriculture of the state of Iowa, the greatest ag state in the nation, and we can all be very, very proud of that. The second thing would be, we really need to work hard to deliver on what we know that we need to do. Our country's at a crossroads, frankly, at a national level, and we need to work hard to ensure that we can head in the right direction after the election as we head into next year.
Perfect. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners today?
I don't think so. Good to talk.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for coming on and kind of talking about what you do, the things that you're passionate about, and what farming is like in the good old state of Iowa. And thank you to everyone for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to. And always remember, state politics have an impact that's bigger than you think.